Hi, and welcome to this special event where Anveo Group and Dime Software are teaming up to present an entry-level introduction to field service management using Business Central, enhanced by some of our own software products. In this presentation, we assume no prior knowledge of our software, but you do need to have at least some basic understanding of Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central or its predecessor, Microsoft Dynamics NAV, to be able to follow along. I am delighted to announce that I'm being joined today by Kay Hannigan from Anveo Group. She'll be co-hosting this presentation together with yours truly. Later on, we'll share our contact details with you, but before we do that, we want to cut to the chase and dive into the fun part as quickly as possible. As mentioned already, the topic of today is field service in Business Central, and more to the point, how you can use standard Business Central and plug and play third-party tools to close the missing gaps. After providing just a little bit of context, we are going to spend the majority of this hour showcasing our products and how they work with Business Central and how they complement each other indirectly through Business Central. Good. Our goal of this presentation then is to show you just one way on how you can compose a technological solution to field service management. Both Anveo Group and Dime Software have found this little niche where we can thrive, and that is the Dynamics channel, of course. Just to put things into perspective, after a dozen years or so of doing this line of work, a few patterns have emerged that give us a glimpse of how companies try to get their work done. Again, we're just going to stick to the technological side of things and not dig deeper into business processes or anything like that. The first contender is the good old Neolithical way through pen and paper. It's nice and simple. Office workers keep a ledger somewhere in a dusty, dark office and send people on their way. Small teams that operate in a fairly straightforward business environment don't need much more than that, really. The main competitor of, I would say, any software product ever made would have to be good old Excel. It's a Swiss Army knife. What else can I say about Excel? It's extremely powerful. Most people know how to use it, and it sort of gets the job done. An emerging contender that Microsoft is pushing hard these days is its integration with their own Dynamics 365 field service solution. And they go toe-to-toe with the composition model using third-party tools such as the Anveo Service App and Dime.Scheduler. Another relative newcomer is the birth, or should I say the rebirth, of low-code. Low-code actually has been around for quite a while, but now with the new wave of platforms, perhaps low-code will stick around after the buzz has settled. And lastly, a classic would have to be custom software development. Custom software has its place in the world and it sounds appealing, and it could be and would be the perfect choice for those with the skills and resources to develop and especially maintain the software they create. Now, it can be quite overwhelming to find the right solution. Ideally, you would just use a product that has all the necessary features right out of the box. But since that's quite unlikely to ever happen, you'll have to link and use a few products to get to the desired situation. Now, a few things to keep in mind when you're building a solution would include, obviously, what comes out of the box. And does that meet the needs to get the work done? If it's good enough, let's say if it covers 80% of the required functionality, you may want to stop there before you start pre-optimizing while your time and resources might be put to better use in other areas. And we find that quite a few organizations fall into the trap of pre-optimizing and forget the bigger picture that technology is just a means to achieve a certain result. Also, to what extent can you configure and customize a solution with minimum effort and risk? What are The cost associated with a particular solution. Things to keep in mind would be licensing, hosting, updates, license and feature upgrades, etc. And obviously, who's going to support the solution? Who will maintain and update the software? What are the security protocols if a vulnerability is detected? And so on and so forth. I could keep going on for a while, but that's not why we're here. We are here to make a case for the formula of using off-the-shelf solutions made by ISVs. The considerations here are the same as I just explained a minute ago. Some arguments why you would want to plug and play third-party tools in Business Central are that ISVs, in particular in this channel, are quite accessible. They're not huge companies, and you can get in touch with the people calling the shots quite easily, which may help to build trust, and you could even influence their roadmap if you wanted to. Also, in this channel, ISVs tend to focus more on their product and rely on their partners to handle time-consuming activities like implementation projects, workshops, support, and so on. And as our livelihood depends on it, we develop, distribute, and maintain our software to keep it as relevant and up-to-date as possible. Software rot is a real thing, and it gets messy, it's painful, and it gets costly very quickly indeed. And lastly, using Business Central as the hub, we can tag along this behemoth that is Microsoft, and distribute our software as an extension and provide this plug-and-play experience with minimum effort. Now, I think that is enough theory for now, and show you some action. What we're going to do next is we're going to go full circle and simulate a real-life situation, albeit a slightly simplified one. We are going to begin in Business Central and create a service order. Then we're going to look for a technician that can go out and execute the work that has been assigned to him. We'll be using Dime.Scheduler for that. When we found the right person for the job, we are going to confirm the appointment and update the service order in Business Central. And after that, it's up to the technician to carry out the work. And we're going to use the Anveo Service App to do that. This mobile app picks up the planning and provides the capabilities necessary for the resource to do his job. And then we'll also send back updates to Business Central. So you start seeing this theme emerging. The story begins with Business Central and it ends in Business Central with two small detours to Dime.Scheduler and Anveo Service App, respectively. What I'm going to do now is switch to the next tab in my browser, where you will see a standard version of Business Central Cloud. Pretty much everything that I'm going to show is standard Business Central, except for maybe one button. So I'm going to go over this part quite quickly and go straight to the service orders list and create a new service order. I'm going to keep this very simple as to keep focus and maintain a fast-paced demo. So all I need to do basically is select a customer. That will also populate a bunch of address fields, which we'll use in a second. I'm also going to explicitly set this service order type. I'm setting this for a reason because, as we'll see in a bit, is that we use a color coding system in our planning tool to link this service order type to a color. So you can see right away on the planning board what kind of work we're dealing with. And we're going to do something very similar with the repair status code of the service item, which is represented by this horizontal bar at the bottom of the appointment on the planning board. So I'm just going to indicate this is going to be a general service order type. And then select a service item, and then we're pretty much good to go to start looking for somebody that can carry out the work. Now the simple order is ready. We can start looking for a technician to do the work, and we're going to use our good old Dime.Scheduler for that. Now, Dime.Scheduler itself is not built in Business Central, so you're not going to see much evidence of its existence in Business Central. It is rather a graphical planning wrapper, let's say, around Business Central data that allows you to plan essentially anything and anyone, as you can see on the screen right now. In a nutshell, Dime.Scheduler is all about planning, resources, and tasks. A resource can be anything or anyone, and a task can be anything. It's up to you or your customer to decide what constitutes a resource and what constitutes a task. Today, of course, we're going to be planning service technicians and service orders. As you can see, there's a lot going on screen. There's a lot of information on there. I'll get to most of it, but I would like to highlight two components on this planning view right now. Typically, the story starts here at the top left corner on the screen in a component named the Open Tasks list. And as you can imagine by its name, this list shows all the work that still needs to be assigned to a technician. Through drag and drop, we want to get this list as empty as possible and fill up the schedule of our technicians as much as we can. And drag and drop is done from this component to our planning board, which we can see in the middle of our screen. The planning board naturally is the center of the application, and it's where you will fill up the schedule of your technicians. On the left-hand side of this splitter right here, we can see our list of resources, which is the majority are service technicians, but at the bottom, we also have a couple of vehicles that we want to plan. On the right-hand side, we see our timeline, and in the middle, we can see the planning that we have produced before. There is much more on screen. As you can tell, we have components like a map, like a resource filters component. There's even a capacity and planning pivot grid. They are supporting components to help the planner find the best resource for the job. That can be based on location, can be based on attributes, or availability, or any three of the combinations. I'll get back to some of these components in a little bit. But first, we want to get that order that I just made in Business Central available in this tool. To do that, I'm going to go back to the previous tab. And then what you do is go to the Actions item in the ribbon. And this will be a very common pattern all across Business Central. There will be a submenu for Dime.Scheduler where you can either make the data available in the planning tool or remove it from the planning tool. There is a wafer-thin, lightweight extension for Dime.Scheduler in Business Central that connects Business Central data, like resources, like service orders, like resource capacity, with the planning tool. And it also contains the opposite. It contains the functionality to write back planning data produced in Dime.Scheduler back in Business Central. So let me send this order, and then we can look for a technician to carry out this work. What will happen next is we're going to gather everything that is relevant for planning, information like address, like customer and contact info, the service item. We're going to gather the entire data graph and we'll make it available as one row in the open task list. So let's have a look-see at how that is materialized. So if we go back to the open task list, we should see an order with number 148 show up in the list of unplanned work. Let's zoom in on the open task list, and we can see we have set a sorter on the job number. So I should scroll down a little bit to see this order. 148 has just been pushed in real time automatically to this bucket of unplanned work. Once a task appears in this list, it is completely up to the planner to decide what's going to happen next. If the planner already knows who's going to do it and when, all he needs to do is drag this task and drop it somewhere on the planning board of which he thinks that will make sense and is feasible to get it done. But oftentimes the planner may want to use suggestions and more informed decision to see who is the best resource for the job. One of these tools could be the map. If there's a location known for this task, what you can do is click on that task in the open task list. And if there's a location known for that, the map will be repositioned and will add a marker to show where this order needs to take place. So you can see if I hover over this marker, that's where order 148 needs to take place. And then we can look for nearby resources to see who's close by and who's available to do that little detour. These purple markers, these indicate the locations of our resources. Location can be based on actual real-time location tracking using tracking devices in people's cars, or it could be based on something more static like an employee address in Business Central. Whatever location mode you're using, you can simulate a trip and perhaps see if it's doable for this researcher, Richard Clarkson, to make a last-minute stop to help out that customer. And based on real-time traffic information, you will see a trip and an estimation of the travel distance and the travel time. So we see here for Richard Clarkson, it would take just under 44 minutes to get to this customer. And if you then take a look at his planning on the planning board for that resource of Richard, we see there's not that much going on for him that week. So purely based on where he is at that moment, we could assign him to this order 148. But if you want to be 100% sure that this resource can actually do that work, you could use another component called the resource filters component. And maybe I can slide this one down so you can see both our map and resource filters in one view like that. This component essentially is a query filter builder, allowing you to look for resources with certain attributes. Using standard Business Central, we'll have service zones and skills at our disposal, but you could be adding any dimension that you can think of. Classic examples would include departments, languages, certifications, business units, and so on. If you can manage the data in Business Central, you can use it in Dime.Scheduler. And then you can construct a filter manually if you know by heart what are the desired attributes for a resource to do this job. You can construct a filter like that. Let's say you want to throw in somebody who has this particular skill, and let's also add a preferred region like that. Once you're happy with your query, you can hit this button right here, apply it, and then you'll see these are the resources that meet these criteria. If it's a bit too strict, the filter, you can modify your query or even remove parts of your query, reapply. So you may see here, there's going to be more resources that have the required skill, but not necessarily operating in the right area. So these are just suggestions that the tool gives you. It's up to the planner to decide if anyone here in this list is acceptable to do that work. This is manual, but we can take it one step beyond that, because if you know the requirements for a certain task, you can pass them along with your task from Business Central so that you can automatically apply the required attributes in one go. If you can provide the required attributes with your task, this filter button next to your task will be enabled, allowing you to obviously click on that, which will populate the filter builder and will immediately execute that query onto our list of resources. So for this order 148, these are the required attributes, and these are the 3 resources of type person, so the technicians, that could be considered for that order 148. And here again, we see this Richard Clarkson show up. So he was pretty close by. He is available and he's skilled to do that job. So he could be a good candidate for the job. But nothing is set in stone, nothing is fixed. All the workflows are optional. It's all in support for the planner to make that call. So you can ignore all of it. You can ignore the map or the resource filters and assign it to somebody else. That's up to the planner. But I'm going to abide by that suggestion, and I'm going to plan this order 148 and I'm going to assign it to Richard Clarkson. So it all leads up to this very extremely simple action of selecting your task and dropping it somewhere on the planning board. So I'm going to put it on the books for tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So as soon as I release this task, a whole bunch of digital witchcraft is going to happen behind the scenes to make sure that this planning data is written back to any system that wants to be notified of that new planning. You could be pushing this planning to people's Outlook calendars. You could be invoking a new Power Automate flow, send text messages to customers or resources. That's completely up to you what you want to do with that information. And as I'll focus on in a second, it's also going to write back to Business Central. So you have your single version of the truth in BC, which might invoke other business processes and other extensions like the one we're going to see in a second. But before we go to Business Central, I would like to highlight this background color, because as I told you in the Business Central service order, we're going to link the service order type to a color. So when I double click on this order, and navigate to this combo box here, if I expand that, we can see the general service type is linked to this particular blue color. So you'll see right away what kind of work you're dealing with. It's essentially the same story with the underscore, which we're going to link with the repair status code of your order. Good. Before I go to Business Central, I would like to do one more thing. Perhaps I know to do this job successfully, we need a special vehicle. Perhaps we have to go to the second floor with a furniture lift or something like that. So I'm going to assign a special vehicle that we have in our fleet. To do that, select your appointment, hit the Shift key on your keyboard and drag a new block onto the planning board. So now we have 2 resources assigned to that same appointment for job 148. And as soon as you do anything on this planning board, we're going to invoke the listeners that are eagerly waiting for new updates. Like I said, could be Outlook, could be a Power Automate flow, but it also will write back to Business Central. And in the case of service orders, we're going to create resource allocation lines for each block that we have assigned to this order. To go to Business Central, we can do it the long way, but we want to minimize clicks. So you can just right click on your appointment. That opens up the context menu, and I hope you can see that always down here. You can navigate to the service order in Business Central. What that does basically is open up a new tab in the browser, and it takes us back to this original order 148. And using our standard connector for Dime.Scheduler in Business Central, like I said, we're going to create resource allocation lines. And that table is tucked away right here. So when I click on this, we should see 2 rows appear, one for Richard for tomorrow and one for this vehicle, car number 1. So it writes back immediately and goes both ways. So if I were to reschedule, just to show you, for Thursday, so I can just drag and drop this to a different day, to a different resource. If I then go back to Business Central and update the screen, you'll see the allocation date will now be Thursday rather than tomorrow. So everything ends up in Business Central. Whatever you do, there should be an equivalent record somewhere in Business Central, which gives you all the freedom to do more things with that, like reporting and stuff like that. Good. Just to recap, we've created a service order. We have found a technician and a suitable date and time to go out and do the work. One of the key deliverables in Business Central, as I just told you, are these resource allocation lines. It's this standard table of resource allocations that is the glue between Business Central, Dime.Scheduler, and the Field Service app that we're going to see next. Once a resource allocation line has been created, that's when the Field Service app kicks in. And it's at this point that I would like to invite Kay to the stage and have her show one of the absolute best field service apps out there.
Hi, I'm Kay from the Anveo team. Today I'm playing the part of a service technician. So as you can see, I have my iPad in front of me, and I'm getting ready to head out for the day. So as soon as those resource lines have been assigned to me, I would receive a push notification. We weren't quite fast enough to get that on my side, but I would receive that info right away. And I would also see it here, for example, in my messages. Now, what we're looking at is our base service app. We are 100% integrated in Dynamics. So any fields and tables I have, I would be represented on my device. So as soon as that intro comes in, for example, when we're talking about messages, I would know I have a new service order. As you can see, I'm working multilingually here on my side. But I would know I need to go and run a synchronization and pull the latest data. On my side, I'm using a synchronization manually, just using this little button, because I do have the ability to work 100% offline. I don't have to turn that off and on, and all of my features would work exactly the same. But it just means that as a technician, it doesn't matter if I'm in the middle of a field or a basement, everything would still work just as I would be used to. As I can see, once I've signed into my app, I do have a couple of options. I have those messages that we looked at already, sort of a history of everything I've done on site. I have some time tracking. On our side, this is simply linked to a standard additional table in Dynamics, but can be linked to any other time tracking ISV if that's in use. And I have all of my details about my service, particular customers that I'm assigned to, service items and item lists if I need to create quotes or orders. But most important to me right away would be my service. And I'm going to jump right in and take a look at, there's a couple of things that I need to be handling. But for example, what I want to look at is this order for tomorrow. I jumped in and I need to visit Deerfield. And first off on my side, I'm just going to swipe to the side and I have the ability to start my navigation. GPS navigation is my favorite. I would get lost without it, but I know exactly how long it's going to take me to get there. Can go ahead, head off to the customer. And then as well, I can also call them or send them an email, tell them I'm about half an hour out so that they know exactly when they're going to be needing to let me in at the door, things like that. I have those details and that possibility available. Additionally, when I jump into my service, I mentioned time tracking, so I can track that journey as well. Maybe that's something I need to make sure that I'm keeping track of, having those details invoiced back to the customer if needed. But as soon as I arrive on start, I'm going to go ahead and start work. Things like this repair status that we're seeing at the top, this is linked to that repair status field that Hendrik also talked about, that's standard from the service module, and that'll update as we go along when we complete our work and are sending everything back. So on my device, I want to make sure I have an overview of everything that I should be doing on site. Do I know about my items? What am I doing? And can I do all that documentation? So as I scroll through, in this case, my service order, I have first off my service item information, both the service item and the item itself. And here on the right, I can always jump in and view some additional details. Then I get into some of my documentation, pictures, spare parts, as well as the actual documentation of what happened on site, and then an item worksheet. We'll get to all of that in a minute because first off, before I arrive, I want to know what I'm actually handling for my service. So let's view my service item itself. All right, so I have a lot of additional details here. I can jump in and view the particular item numbers. Do I have information about was this installed? When was the last time these things were serviced? And over what we call our burger menu, I can always jump through and, for example, view components. This gives me the opportunity to check, do I have the spare parts needed on hand? If we're talking about an installation, is everything already ready for the installation for me to be able to handle that? I'm a little more informed upfront before I get on site. But I also have pictures and history. This is always good to know. Maybe my colleague covered for me last week when I was on vacation, or it's just been a while since I was on site with a customer. I have that history in this case with our base app. This is old service orders, already closed service orders, and the pictures that are linked to that. And maybe I just need the last 6 visits, the last 6 months. I can always filter that down, but I'm able to see everything that's gone on with this particular service item before I arrive on site. So once I'm informed and I know everything about the item I should be repairing, I'm going to jump down into our actions because I'm on site. I want to really get started on doing the repairs and doing the work that I should be handling. We have 2 possible options to handle that. One would be our tasks, as you can see at the top. These are linked and assigned directly to the particular service item lines in Dynamics and would only be accessible if your service is starting in Dynamics. However, the checklist's relatively new feature comparatively, they are then a little more flexible, and we'll look at that then afterward. So with my tasks, I have a set list. I know what I should be doing on site. Looks like I got a couple of no's, so I haven't done anything. I'm just going to jump right in and get started. When I'm talking about any sort of data entry on the app, I have, of course, 3 possibilities. All right, now that my mouse is not working and I can go ahead and add my comment fields, I could, of course, type this. I'm possibly the slowest typer known to man, so that's not how I prefer to do things. So instead, I'm going to use our pre-configured responses, our dictionaries and word lists. In this case, we've already set it up in the background to know there are only some set standardized answers for what I'm doing on site. So mouse was my component, And this has been replaced. This makes it a lot easier and faster to move through my documentation. Here I've got a service temperature. Here I can see an expected value, so also a possibility to go ahead and add that and say, I am expecting that this should be what you should be seeing on site. And it looks like I'm looking for 12 degrees. Not too bad. And again, here I once again have those tasks, so I can very quickly flip through and do the documentation because my most important thing as a technician is actually completing my service on site. Now, once I get to a result here, I'm going to use that third possible option, that standardized responses with the dictionaries on word lists and manually typing. I can also use voice recognition on my device. Mouse has been replaced, but please check with customer next week. That makes it really easy to go through. I'm just on the way to the car or packing up my tools. I can make those notations. All right, so I've completed all of my tasks on site, done all of that documentation, and now I can just go ahead and head home. Well, maybe not. I do have some other documentation that would be needed here, of course. So I'm going to need to add some spare parts. I can, of course, use a barcode scanner if that's what I would like to do. So let's add a spare part there. And I'm just using the camera off of my device. And I can also add additional items as well. I can always flip through and go ahead and say, okay, here are those spare parts that I want to add. I want those notations to have those saved there. I can also instead work with my item list if I don't have any barcodes. And here is where we would see the first possible feature, or the only feature really, that might look a little different if I was working completely offline. These are what we call our live fields, these little tiny green dots that flip back and forth to red. If I scroll slightly further down, you'll see it's only updating my screen. Now, this is set up in the background to about every 30 seconds on my setup, pull the latest information from Dynamics. It means I always have an accurate stock count for my customers, but sometimes this isn't always necessary. I would otherwise have a little dot remain red, and I would have the update from the last time I had a synchronization. So I'll just go ahead, add another spare part. We have done a lot of work with this customer today. And I can see on my service item worksheet that overview of everything that we've been doing on site. When we're talking about documentation, I might also need to add a resource. In a lot of cases, when we're talking about service, Hendrik also mentioned we might need some specific machinery that we're working with, a particular truck that I want to make sure is invoiced to the customer that we had to use that, or a lift, or I might be working in a team of multiple people. That would be the case. Marty has done some work with me today. He's a trainee, so he was on site for an hour, just making sure and watching, but we want to make sure his hours are also noted because that'll then travel back to our Dynamics where we would have that overview. My last and personal favorite part of any sort of documentation is, of course, the picture documentation. And again, I'm going to use just the camera off of my device. And I can always jump in and make some amendments and edit these pictures. Here I see the possibility to add a picture from my gallery. This is always good to know. Each user would have access to 3 devices. So this might mean that I've taken all of my pictures with my smartphone that has a better camera, but I'm doing the rest of my documentation on my tablet simply because I have a better, larger keyboard there that I'm working with. I'm going to go ahead and edit that picture. I want to make sure my colleagues know, here are the items that we installed, or I'm not sure what the spare part is. Can you check? I can always edit, and draw and make those amendments. So my documentation itself is complete. That all looks pretty good. And I can sort of start heading out. But before I do that, I did mention there were 2 possible ways to cover everything that was done on site. So we looked at our tasks already, but I'd like to go over our checklists. So our checklists are not specifically linked to any table or field, but can be linked configurably however you need them to be. In this case, it also offers more flexibility of what should be done on site. So here I have a checklist for service, and this is similar to those tasks that we looked at before. I can see exactly what I should be doing on site. I have some mandatory fields, these lovely red bars, as well as if I click on edit, standardized responses to how everything should be handled. I also have, when we look at this check hardware button, a simple yes/no question response, which in this case also configurably then says, since you've answered no, I'm going to give you a different question. So a lot more flexibility when we're talking about using the checklists and how that will be handled to cover that. But this also means with this slightly more configurable or much more configurable possibility to handle things on site, that I have several options. I can perhaps say it's a checklist for standard repairs, checklist for installation, or just yearly maintenance, or even modify that down onto an item base if I need to, because this item needs to be handled differently. Maybe I have a checklist for health and service. Anything that your teams need to do on site, that can then be handled as such. Here with my installation checklist, I've actually got several pages. So I've broken it down into several steps where I need to say, okay, check everything beforehand, things after, and I still have, again, those other possibilities to say, here's a mandatory field for context. I can collect a signature. I need to take some pictures. So another flexible possibility that doesn't need to be linked to the service order or the service item lines, but can be linked anywhere else as needed. All right. So I'm going to jump back to my service order itself. Done all of my work on site, done all of my documentation. I'm going to boogie and head out. So what I would like to do first off is I need to get a customer signature, of course, that I've done everything on site. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. When I do, I automatically get an overview of all of those service item lines so the customer knows what they're signing in advance. And I'll just hit that lovely green button. I think I missed a step. It's possible at any point in the process when using the app to add such warning messages that say, hey, you need to make sure that you did step A before you do step B. So in this case, I need to end my work. And here is where we see those exact same repair statuses that Hendrik talked about, which will feed back into the Dime.Scheduler. And I would like to go ahead and say this work is finished. And I again get a warning message that says, hey, do you want to do step 2 now? So yeah, that sounds really good. Let's go ahead and collect that signature. All right. So I can always put those in at any point in time when I would like to make sure things are being done in the correct order, or just a reminder that might not be the right server temperature if it's -2 degrees. So there I've got my signature. That looks pretty good. I'm going to go and review my service worksheet, and I like to use the offline version for this. So I have just a standard reporting I can add at any point in time. In this case, when we're talking about for my service order, I have my information and the customer information, as well as that service order number. I can see the service item and all of the service lines that we had discussed. So I have those details, the service task lines, including those commentaries that we had added. And I also have that signature. I'm just using standard reporting, as I mentioned, but any custom reporting can also be used as long as that exists in Dynamics. Maybe it's a particular format, needs a specific letterhead. That can always be added and amended. And as always, I can then take this, send this to the customer's email address if I have that on file in Dynamics, or print it to a Bluetooth printer if I have one available in my truck. So the customer is definitely informed and definitely has all of their details. All right, all that's left for me is to drive home. And I'm going to go right ahead and send all of my details back to my Dynamics. As you can see at the top, my synchronization has a little tiny number. I mentioned I was working mostly offline today. This just tells me I have some updates to send. So I'm going to go ahead and send those. And then I will jump into my Dynamics. And then we can see how that looks. When we're talking about synchronization, I was working with that manual version today. but there is always a possibility to set that up to be handled automatically in the background. You would never see any of that pop up, but instead it would just happen at a particular time of day after processes are completed or at specific time intervals, say every 45 minutes, depending on how you would like that to be handled. Now, once I'm back in my dynamics, I would like to find that service order, and that would be service order 79 here. And right away, I can see that both the status on the order header itself, as well as that status on the particular line, have switched to finish. All of those details are back from my dynamics, so I have those. And that would move over as needed into any additional ISVs that we're working with. They have access to that. Anveo has taken sort of the standard service module and extended it with a couple of fields. So one of them you would see that we have looked at a couple of times would, for example, be those tasks. And I can jump here into my Anveo mobile and review those particular task lines. These are presets. So I can always say, here is a set list that should be done on site. Just go ahead and add that, but I can also modify that as needed. You can see it's also already come back with all of our comments, so I know those details about what happened on site. I also have my images, so I can go ahead, view that image. Maybe I need to save that to some other server location, things like that. Check with my colleague to make sure those spare parts are ordered that I didn't know what they were, or just note that on my customer file. And I would also have access to that signature. So that's all come back into those custom tables in the service order. But we also have information such as those service lines have come back. Here I have, for example, those spare parts that we noted and added. Here I mentioned that Marty was actually a trainee, so I'm going to go ahead and add a discount on my side, but that's more of something for the back office to be handled. From the service technician side, I was able to take everything that I need to do on site, have all of those details available, discuss with my customer, and complete my work. Everything else is then a process in the background in Dynamics, and that can be then picked up and used later as needed. So for my side, everything looks good. And Hendrik, let me give it back to you.
Thanks, Kay. Now, I think and I hope we've made our point and that the message is quite clear, but I'll do a brief recap anyway to sum up the last 40 minutes or so. I hope both Kay and I made it crystal clear that Business Central is at the heart of it all. The data that matters remains in Business Central, so you can have this single version of the truth in one single system. You bring over your data to the extensions and you set it up to the way that you want it to. Both applications are quite flexible and give you a lot of wiggle room to set it up just so. We bring a batteries included experience where you still have the possibility to tweak the solution according to your needs. That's mostly going to be configuration in our software and customizations to the connectors in Business Central that control the message flows to and from the extensions. And last but not least, our products are complementary, and yet there is no direct dependency between them. You can plug in either application and it will just work immediately with the other one. Also good to know is that both our product teams are in touch with each other to make the products more complementary and more powerful, without forgetting this key principle of using Business Central as the focal point where even partners can intercept and tailor the composition where and if needed. Now, if you would like to get a closer look at our products, we would be more than happy to give a tailored demo to you or to your customers and prospects. And for both products, you can try out the software for free for a limited time. Feel free to use either one of these links, or you can get in touch with us directly by email that's currently displayed on screen. So on behalf of Anveo Group and Dime Software, I would like to thank you very much for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.